Commissioner. And we'll start with the speakers on behalf of the political groups, and we'll start with the EPP group. So I give the floor to Mr. Schwab for 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Monsieur le Président, Monsieur le Commissaire, merci beaucoup.
President, Commissioner, thank you very much for what you've said and how clearly the fact that you've so clearly given the argument for strong protection of consumers in Europe.
The level of protection of consumers in Europe is high, and we should not say something else, not to create misunderstandings. The level of protection is very high, but that doesn't mean that consumers as ourselves, that we haven't done experiences where the protection was not the right one. Therefore, the EPP group wants to work on adapting the consumer protection in that areas where it's not yet the right one. And let me conclude first that it's very often not the right protection, not the right level of protection in areas where we don't have full harmonization. So your task, from our point of view, is first and foremost to fight for full harmonization so that we can offer European consumers, wherever they live, wherever they buy, whatever they want to do, the unique and the common protection that they merit. And unfortunately, here we face a lot of resistance. And I kindly ask you that we believe, and the best tool and the best project where we have successfully implemented this is the Passenger Rights Directive, where every flight passenger at the airport at the arrival can see the rights and can implement them. And therefore, it has taken us by surprise and by deception that it was not possible in this crisis to offer all citizens that were flying in the corona crisis in the first half of the year the same level of reimbursement. Some have been given a voucher, others have been given the money back, and this in the European Union in the 21st century is not what consumers merit. And we have been discussing about that when we were meeting in the Internal Market and Consumer Protection Committee. That is one important element. We need full harmonization in consumer protection to make sure that we can move on to the 21st century altogether in Europe. And the second point I want to point out as well, Commissioner. We believe that consumer protection can be improved in some points, but we don't believe that the new concept of vulnerable consumers is a valid concept, because there is no general definition of vulnerability. You can become a consumer in vulnerability if you break your leg. But if you haven't, you are not vulnerable. So we have to adapt this concept with a lot of calm and prudence, not to create further bureaucracy. And one element where we have in the past had a quite difficult path with the Parliament was the Consumer Credit Directive. If there is something to improve, the EPP is open and ready to work on it. But please, let's make sure, Commissioner, that we don't further add bureaucracy on a directive which is already quite difficult to be applied in the interest of consumers, because sometimes they would be rather more easily getting a credit, and that is something that we should not block. Thank you so much.
Vielen Dank, Kollege Schwab. Grazie mille.
Thank you, Mr. Schwab. And now, on behalf of the S&D group, I'll give the floor to Madam Schaldemose for 3.5 minutes, and who is joining us from Copenhagen. Go ahead, please.
Tusind tak for det.
Thank you very much, President. And thank you very much to Commissioner Reinders for an excellent introduction. Let me start by going back more than 14 years when I was newly elected MEP, and Facebook was just getting off the ground, and we were talking about consumer products and how to make them safer. Since those times, a lot has happened. Online purchase is out competing shops, and more of the production is taken over by robots. We've had a very quick development, and that's why we need to develop and adapt our consumer rights. We need to adapt them from the world of yesteryear to the world of tomorrow, and that's why I'm so very glad to see the Commission coming up with a proposal for a new consumer agenda, which will stop the gaps in our consumer protection. I'm very pleased with what has been tabled, and I think it's worth praising. This is one of the most ambitious pieces of legislation that I've seen in the years I've been a member of the European Parliament. There are, of course, things that are less good, and I'll come back to this in a minute, but let me start by emphasizing what I think is good. I'm glad to see that the Commission is trying to improve consumer protection on the digital platforms. Anything that's illegal offline should also be illegal online, and I hope that will be clear in the legislation. And I also think it's excellent that the EU wants to make the consumer more active in the green shift. We just discussed that. But it's not perfect. There are places where we should go further than what the Commission is proposing. I don't think it's enough just to have information. Information must go hand in hand with clear rules for the consumer. The Green Consumption Pledge, for example, it's important for the consumer to know the carbon footprint of the company when they take a product off the shelf, but there should also be an entitlement for the consumer to have the product repaired. And we also need to see how we can make sure that market supervision is better. Perhaps we need to have somebody controlling the controllers. It's also very important to emphasize that members of the European Parliament could be much more involved in consumer policy, but things have moved faster over the last 14 years and will move even faster in the future, so we need to be effective in our legislation so that we can win ground both in terms of the ecology and in terms of digital development. We shouldn't be legislating for the sake of legislation. We should ensure a level playing field and a greener playing field to the benefit of manufacturers and consumers. I look forward to working with the Commission and the European Parliament on this, which I'm sure will lead to rules which are to the benefit of the consumer and the single market.
Thank you very much. Now, on behalf of Renew Europe, Mrs. Harantsova, 3 minutes.
Very much, Mr. Commissioner. My group welcomes the new consumer agenda and many proposals and revisions foreseen in it. As I have a little time, let me focus on 4 of them. Package travel. I encourage the Commission to look to the Danish example of their answer to the crisis, where the Guarantee Fund ensured that consumers were reimbursed within the normal delay, while giving a lifeline to travel companies to continue to have liquid assets and not to go under. Such temporary guarantee loans seem to work well both for consumers and businesses. But whatever the final decision is, we cannot have the situation of the last 6 months, where consumers were used as free bank loans by the travel companies. This is not acceptable. Secondly, on general product safety and product liability, the key here is a tweaking of the law, not a complete redrafting. Much of the legal framework is still working and is working well. We cannot let fear of the future and the technological developments lead to new rules that stop or slow down innovation. Risk is not in itself negative. All actions have a risk. If we had banned all products with a risk in the past, we would not have elevators in the building, the plane in the air, or cars on the road. All innovations include some risk which we should be willing to take. Thirdly, on geo-blocking, the deadline for the first review expired on the 23rd of March, and here we are in November. I hope the delay will have given you time to draft the amendment to include copyrighted goods and services like e-books, videos and music within its scope. Our citizens should be allowed to buy digital goods across borders. It is time to say enough is enough to national fragmented markets. Lastly, we still have a problem of dual quality of products in Europe. This must be addressed and included in the guidance from the Commission to unfair commercial practices. And we should go further to end this practice once and for all in the single market. So, Commissioner, we have put a lot on your plate. You can count on support of my group. We just have to make sure that the proposals are balanced and the single market is not fragmented, but further completed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, on behalf of ID, Mr. Lacapelle, 4 minutes.
Mesdames, Messieurs, chers collègues, la Commission européenne a ce 13 novembre
Ladies and gentlemen, on the 13th of November, the European Commission launched its new consumer agenda. It's full of good intentions, but I am quite sceptical because I've seen the same good intentions before with the former Commission agendas. Now, I'll focus above all on the digital part of this agenda, which the European Commission wants to strengthen its legislation. Its aims are clear: fighting against manipulation, misleading advertising, for example. We also want to improve traceability of products, set out the transition towards the digital financial services, and also ensuring that European consumers are misled and end up in debt. So we can support these aims. However, there are two problems here. Firstly, the principle of globalization goes against this. The European Commission in the text admits that the value chains and production chains are more globalized, more interconnected. However, there's no aim to change this. Let's take the example of China, which is where over 60% of faulty products come from coming into the European market. Now, globalization encourages free trade with China. So what will stop China producing faulty or lesser quality goods or counterfeit goods to European consumers from their own websites? So it's Chinese sites under Chinese law. What legislation? European legislation can do nothing against that. Now, the European Commission calls for drawing up pseudo action plans with third countries. Well, that's not going to have any impact. We tried that with the US, whether it's protection of personal data, and we allowed the US to pillage our data. Only regulation and this fight against globalization can provide a sustainable approach to this. We need to bring up trade barriers against these products. Now, the second problem is that European development needs to use European products. Artificial intelligence, for example, by analysing mass data, will allow us to predict reactions when there's crises, specifically health crises as the one we're going through right now. Now, if we want to use this data, then we are going to take this data away from our businesses. Our competitors will develop it themselves. They will apply this in other areas, but all in offensive areas. They will try and create mass panics, attacking certain critical networks in certain countries, and we will not have any way of reacting to this. We need to ensure data is processed in European countries, European businesses, and it's closed off to other countries. The European Commission does not consider this solution, but that is something that needs to be looked at. These key issues are applied across this agenda. Colleagues, I've said this before and I'll say it again, it's political will that is lacking to implement the reforms that we need, and I would call on you to follow me in this path.
Thank you very much. Now, on behalf of the Greens, European Free Alliance, Madam Cavazzini, 2 minutes.
Dear colleagues, thanks, Madam President. Passenger rights, product safety, or collective redress. The EU consumer protection standards are amongst the highest in the world. And we can be proud of that. Yet, the old EU consumer strategy is 8 years old, and an update is highly needed. What is at stake? The climate crisis is more urgent than ever, and to empower consumers to make the most sustainable choices is something that we have to urgently do. With a proper right to repair and mandatory labeling, we can make the consumers become agents of sustainable change. Many people fear that the digital transformation is going on faster than we, the policymakers, are able to regulate. This cannot be. Consumer protection may not lag behind in the online world. I am very happy that the Commission took up in its strategy the concept of vulnerable consumers. There are groups that need a closer look, that might need special protection, like, for example, heavily indebted fellow citizens. And, dear colleagues, we have to make sure that our high consumer protection standards are not undermined in trade agreements. Take the precautionary principle. It is a fundamental standard in the EU policymaking, yet it is not fully anchored in our bilateral trade agreements like in CETA, and this needs to change. Dear Commissioner, I am expecting ambitious proposals in those areas, and I'm looking forward to working with you and my colleagues in the IMCO committee on ambitious legislation. Trust of EU citizens in EU consumer protection is high. Let's not disappoint them, and let's live up to their expectations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, on behalf of the European Conservatives and Reformists, Madam Mazurek, 1.5 minutes. Thank you very much. The pandemic irrevocably transferred trade to online platforms. There are a number of advantages, faster sales, access to more sellers. There are some dangers. It is important, especially in the case of sellers from outside the single market that do not follow our rules. Such practices can threaten consumers and also SMEs. Given economic crisis, we should focus on protecting consumers. The Commission has a challenge because it wants to change and review legislation, but we should not over-regulate. We need rules for artificial intelligence that can be a motor of economic development in Europe, or that our economies will slow down. It depends on us. If we focus on innovation, we can benefit. Thank you very much. And now on behalf of GUE, Madam Konečná, 2.5 minutes.
Děkuji, paní předsedající, vážené kolegyně, vážení kolegové, vážený pane komisaři.
Thank you. Colleagues, Commissioner.
The Commission recently presented a new program which strengthens the European consumer and allows them a more active role when it comes to the green transition. There's some important points here. But when it comes to the different quality of products, there's no breakthrough at all. The Directive on Unfair Competition, which was supposed to end the duality of quality, is not working because Austria and Germany are refusing to sign up to it, and also because and it's stopping the European Union implementing it correctly. Commissioner Reinders, you said that the European consumer are crucial to fundamental changes. They can have a lot of influence through the way they shop. They must have the possibility of taking sustainable decisions, and they must know that their rights are defended under all conditions. And I would like to know whether that also applies to the double standards for foodstuffs. How can you accept that on the single market products of different quality are being sold? If the consumer states clearly that they don't want a double quality, are you prepared to make this an instance of unfair competition, or are you just going to say to the consumer that they'd be better off going shopping elsewhere? That would mean that Czechs would have to go to Germany despite the pandemic and do their shopping. I think that the new agenda is a step in the right direction in very many ways. For example, effective implementation of consumer rights. What I don't like, however, is the fact that the European Commission does not always correctly implement things that they have already adopted, particularly when it comes to consumer rights. I think that's very clear. We have to strengthen the rights of consumers. We need to promote consumer protection organizations. And, of course, we must have a right to guarantees and a right to repairs, but please look at the issue of dual quality as well and dual standards for products.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Stefanec, 3 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome this agenda of the Commission. We need to work on the European consumer protection. The consumers' expenditures amount to 54% of European GDP, which makes this topic very relevant for the economy as well. Consumer protection now includes new aspects within our digital economy. We're not only talking about exchanging faulty products, low-quality services, or getting on your money back. More and more, we have been confronted with sophisticated online fraud, identity theft, or the new phenomenon of the so-called cryptocurrencies. Member states are not able to fight these phenomena on their own. When reforming the European consumer protection policies, we have to take these aspects into account. We need to create efficient mechanisms to protect our citizens. Another closely related topic is the development of artificial intelligence technologies. We have to realize that it's always humans taking the final decision, not only when using products and services with an AI element, but throughout the entire final chain supported by AI. Another specific topic that we should pay more attention to is protecting children online. Children are especially exposed to fraudulent or aggressive commercial practices. Often they are even harassed. I believe that we need to do more to protect children using the following measures. Firstly, we have to strengthen media literacy, develop the children's critical thinking, as well as skills that are necessary to analyze and identify the differences between objective facts and subjective opinions. Secondly, we have to initiate the creation of effective systems ensuring the verification of the user's age. We have to secure their use in order to protect children vis-à-vis digital products, services, content and commercial use. Thirdly, we have to create an online mechanism to report illegal and inappropriate online content, including a rapid intervention system designed to block the access to website content. At the same time, it's necessary to engage Internet service providers, including social networks, so that they play an active role in preventing and deleting illegal content. I believe that we need EU principles for safer social networks, and we have to promote the privacy protection standard settings to include children registering on social networks in order to increase the security for minors. We also need a pan-European code of conduct for video game sales to minors. At the same time, we have to protect better children online, and like this we will also contribute to a safer life for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Madam Leitão Marques, 3 minutes.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, for no one any longer believes that the internet is going to turn markets transparent and remove information asymmetries. We know this is not true. The platform's market power is vast and the network effects are constantly increasing. It's as though we go out naked into the market, unprotected. When we go into an online shop, the sellers know us. They know us better than we know ourselves, and therefore they can exploit our weaknesses and vulnerabilities. If we're looking for some trainers, they recommend some gym equipment, a personal trainer, or maybe even a diet program. So we need to get dressed. We need to protect ourselves, to claw back some privacy. Consumer data should not be used for effects other than those of which they were provided, nor should non-essential data, which is not absolutely essential, should be gathered. The digital transition, that doesn't only change the way we buy and sell, it also changed products which now look like services. They've become smart and dynamic over their life cycle. It could be self-driving cars, this could be a smart cooker that I get my Christmas cake from rather than going to the bakery as I did in the past. We need to ensure that these digital products do not become obsolete too quickly. We also need to ensure that the speed of entry of new products onto the market that we're seeing from Europe or from elsewhere and their updates is not done to the detriment of our safety. The revision of the General Product Safety Directive should therefore take into account the conclusions of the IMCO report which was presented today. It's important to consider the precautionary principle, above all for high-risk innovative products. We need to ensure that the burden of proof is that they are not dangerous. Slower innovation in certain cases could lead to greater trust and which would last for longer. The use of blockchain could improve traceability of products or artificial intelligence to strengthen the oversight bodies. Commissioner, the new agenda in this and other areas should ensure that consumers have the same tools available to them as platforms and service providers do. In summary, the new agenda should be a software update to the current legislation which removes the bugs, which makes legislation smart and tailored to provide effective protection to the consumer in an economy which we want to be sustainable and an economy that we know will become increasingly digital. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Botos for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, President. Dear Commissioner, dear colleagues, it's been more than 10 months since we lived very difficult times. The pandemic has made nothing to work the way we are used to. We have to work online, we purchase online, we even participate in cultural events online. Medical checks online. The need to adapt rapidly to this type of life has emphasized various problems in the online area. That is why I cannot ignore that regulating the consumer's rights online is included among the priorities presented by the Commission. For sure, it is going to be one of the difficult areas to regulate, especially if we take into account that the digital market is not limited to the EU. The relationships between consumers and traders or producers go beyond the traditional collaboration at the national or EU level. We shall have to go in the international trade relations. We should approach the issue of those who are not consumers because they have no access to this market, because they lack infrastructure or knowledge that is necessary to navigate in such a complex environment. Another important aspect to implement as quickly the EU legislation in the member states. The surveillance authorities to be supported in order to make sure that the regulations on consumer protection are quite implemented. Any EU consumer has the same rights, theoretically, but we know very well that there are major differences in transposition of the legislation and in point of its implementation and the way in which the market is supervised. That is why we shall find specific digital tools, interoperable ones, that should operate on the entire single European market. We shall not be able to ensure the same rights for all EU consumers unless by identifying ways to make sure that all member states have at their disposal both the knowledge and the technical equipment as well as the necessary abilities to supervise, to check the potentially dangerous products that are traded on the EU market. We should have an open-minded approach. We should be innovative to use the new digital technologies as best we can to make them interoperable. They might be the key in ensuring the rights of all European consumers, irrespective of the region in which they live or the way in which they purchase products. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Cormont. 2 minutes.
Madam President, Commissioner, thank you very much for your presentation. We've had not very much good news in this period, so we're very happy to see a bit of hope. And I think that this agenda is going in the right direction. Now, of course, as always, words have to become deeds. I think we've had a fascinating debate. From some speakers, I think I've understood that there will be there is some kind of distinction between the economic and the social sides, but in actual fact, it's the same thing. Destroying the planet with poor quality products and pushing consumers, particularly vulnerable consumers, to buy short lifespan products is an ecological question. And so our work as legislator is to decide on the right kind of rules that we need. Otherwise, what are we here for? We need rules that will ensure that we take proper account of environmental issues, but also rules that will protect our consumers. And so I would like to emphasize the fact that, yes, there are vulnerable consumers. The committee that I'm a part of is called Internal Market and Consumer Protection. In our infinite wisdom, we decided a number of years ago to ensure that we want to protect our consumers, and that's because there's proper reason to do so. So what we have to do is ensure that environmental issues go hand in hand with social issues. And all of this has to be done in an environmental framework. At the moment, we have an economic model which is damaging to the European economy and European SMEs. And so I would urge, Commissioner, that we have an optimal reconciliation of all of this in the report that you're working on. It's a question of the future of our continent, of the future of the planet, and protecting our consumers, including the most vulnerable.
Thank you very much. Now, Madam Pereira, 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, President. We think it's necessary to strengthen or increase the human capacity and financial capacity of the oversight bodies. We need also to give them new competences and ensure there's cooperation between different bodies. We need to have joint actions in cross-border areas. We also believe it's important to improve the effectiveness and efficiency of inspections so that we can ensure that products which are on the market, to be them in shops or by online, are inspected. We need to fight against misleading information and we need to protect consumers. Nevertheless, we don't believe in minimum standards based just on the market theory. Needs to focus above all on consumer protection, but our contribution in this debate also means that we need to fight planned obsolescence. In this area, this is a specific problem. It's incomprehensible, it's intolerable. Large economic groups continue to build in characteristics into a product which make a life cycle much shorter. Whether this is calling for new replacements or whether this is because there are specific aspects which mean that the product will start working sooner. Now, this recourse to planned obsolescence requires a correct response. So this should be banned immediately, and we need to focus on a culture of reuse and repair, and hopefully we can contribute to have more sustainable policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Peters for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much. President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, we're seeing a lot of changes which have an impact on our consumption patterns. The COVID-19 crisis, digitalization, the green transition, those are all examples. Consumers want appropriate rules which meet their needs. They need to have more power in order to contribute to the green transition. Consumers need to be better informed. They need to be told that there is a right to repair that would make it easier to go to the circular economy. We need to counter planned obsolescence. Planned obsolescence is an unfair trading pattern which should not be allowed. The consumer should be able to make sustainable choices. Online, consumers want to have the same level of protection as well. They buy more and more goods and services online. We're seeing more and more online fraud, the spreading of false information and certain types of profiling. These practices have an impact on the ability to choose, and the consumer don't belong in Europe. Furthermore, there are specific groups of consumers who have special needs. For example, children, people with reduced digital ability. These people need to have suitable protection. The COVID-19 crisis has shown up some problems with the consumer protection in Europe. Let's learn from that for the future. Finally, we should not forget to make sure that we always guarantee a level playing field when we come up with new rules. The new consumer agenda is ambitious but essential, and it plays an important role in the green and digital transition, in the relaunch after the recovery, after COVID. We need to build in protection for the consumers. I'm sure you'll be successful.
Thank you very much. Next, Madam Grappini, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President, dear Commissioner, dear colleagues. For sure, we debate tonight after a very important report on sustainability, the intention of the Commission to come up with new measures to increase consumer protection. Of course, as a Deputy Chair of the Internal Market and Consumer Protection Committee, I have always said that we need to have a perfect balance between consumer protection and developing enterprises, especially SMEs. I'm very happy, Commissioner, that you, in your statements several times in the IMCO committee, you've said that you are thinking by your regulations not to bring additional costs or bureaucratic burdens. But we should admit that the COVID crisis has pointed out certain vulnerable points in consumer protection. If you, the Commission, have proposed 5 directions to increase consumer protection, in one of them you have explained that there are shared responsibilities for the Member States, of course, but Commissioner, you have answered many questions, and perhaps you will answer this evening. The Member States no longer have the possibility to have bilateral agreements. The trade agreements are signed and negotiated by the Commission. Are you thinking, Commissioner, in this program to increase consumer protection also to include more concrete measures in the trade agreements by which to ensure, on the one hand, safety in the consumption of products or services for the citizens, and also fair competition on the internal market with the EU companies? And Commissioner, let me congratulate you for having thought to come up with a draft directive on collective redress, because indeed consumers and SMEs have very high costs in order to have individual cases in justice. Do you have a deadline? When do you think this directive will be adopted? Because on the one hand, it takes a lot of time and it costs a lot to go to court, because in many member countries, like in Romania, we do not have specialized trade tribunals. That is why, Commissioner, we need traceability, and this can be done by labeling and to have control. And this can be done by a good and functioning customs union, and for the authorities to control what we decide here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Anderson for 1.5 minutes.
We've had a lot of complaints from consumers for airlines and travel agencies. When, although the airlines like Lufthansa are happy to take advantage of payments from the state, that they're not so serious about helping other people. A lot of people have been waiting for months now for compensation. People who've spent a lot of money on travel. We have to make sure that there is more rights for the consumers, and therefore it's terrible to see that the airline passengers' rights directive has been blocked, and that we're not making a lot of progress with rail passengers. We need to get rid of the legislation on provisional payment. It says that money only needs to be paid shortly before the trip. Passengers need to be better protected against travel companies going broke. We need to make sure we have this legislation.
Thank you very much. Next, Mr. Sokol, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The new strategy for consumers, which is proposed by the European Commission, wants to achieve a high level of protection of consumers and their rights. And this crisis, this is not an easy task. European consumers, 450 million of them, are the weaker part in the communication with producers, and they have to enjoy collective redress. This mechanism will also enable the single market to function properly. The protection of consumers and of its economic priorities are a task of the European Union. The consumer protection policy in the pandemic has shown its importance in protecting consumers, in fighting illegal commercial practices, and in fighting against those who sell who sell fake or faulty medical devices. The European Commission has rightly identified the priorities that it wants to achieve throughout the 5-year period, and it includes digital transformation, the protection of vulnerable groups, and providing legal redress. Also, the issue of faulty devices and also dissemination of fake news are problems that we have to fight with all the instruments at our disposal. Legal protection that has to be enjoyed by the consumers has to be equal in the whole of European Union, so that consumers in Germany, Italy or elsewhere enjoy the same rights. The European Commission has to base its policies on scientific data, which focus on the consumer in themselves and look at them as partners instead of enemies. I would like to welcome this new strategy, and I would like to call upon you to take advantage of the lessons learned in this crisis to protect the consumers better.
Thank you very much. Next, Mr. Angel, 2.5 minutes.
Madam President, Cher Commissaire Reinders, dear colleagues, a fantastic achievement of the European Union has been the development of a robust consumer law acquis, providing rights to consumers and also empowering them to make the right decisions. EU consumer law should largely be based on the principle that well-informed consumers make the best choice and that they can trust in an effective law enforcement. Commissioner, like my S&D colleagues and many others, I welcome the update of the consumer agenda, and I would like to highlight two specific issues. First of all, the notion of average consumer and vulnerable consumer, which are used in EU law. I believe that in the digital world, these notions need to be put in question because the consumer is faced with constant monitoring and manipulation. Consumers are in a state of permanent digital vulnerability or vulnerability by default. Therefore, we need a shift away from the average consumer to the principle of protection by default or by design. This would be a clear and real reaction on the information asymmetries we face. I also believe, like many of us in here, that legislation without effective enforcement puts at risk the consumer's trust and the confidence in the single market. And here I arrive to my second topic. According to the regulation on the air passenger rights, passengers should be reimbursed in 7 days for cancelled flights. We all know that. Even if we intend to help airlines to overcome the extraordinary circumstances of COVID-19 pandemic and also in order to protect the employees, millions, hundreds of thousands of employees of these companies, this can only happen without harming consumers' rights. And I believe that the recommendation of the European Commission on the reimbursement for cancelled transport services in the context of pandemic was necessary. However, on my written question, Commissioner Vălean answered that the responsibility of enforcement is linked to the national enforcement bodies and that the European Commission considers appropriate action only in case of a systematic failure. Well, I think there is a clear systematic failure in this case, but we do not see effective reaction to that by the European Commission. So we should avoid such situations, and if we want to keep consumers' trust and confidence in the single market, we have to do that. I hope that these examples help to understand how we can develop our consumer agenda beyond 2020. Consumer rights are in the DNA of us Socialists and Democrats, and together with many colleagues and with you, Commissioner, we will advance and protect them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now, Mr. Griffin, 1.5 minutes.
Madam President, Commissioner, colleagues, Europeans want to consume more locally and more sustainable. They see the benefits in their wallets. They see the benefits for the planet, for the biodiversity, for fertile soils, cleaner air, clean drinking water. However, when you go to buy something, you have to be an absolute expert to decipher the information which has been provided. Who really can be aware about the environmental or social impact of what they're buying? The last century was a century of unbridled consumption. Now we're in the era of responsible consumption, more sustainable, more ecological, more social. To achieve that, we must ensure that there is information which is clear and transparent on the origin and the makeup of products. How many natural resources have been used to produce this product? What social practice has been used in the manufacturing chain? What carbon footprint? How can it be repaired? How long will it last? How much of this can actually be recycled? And for food, beyond the origin and the nutritional value, what chemicals have been used in its production? What the residual level of pesticides in this product? Ladies and gentlemen, our patterns of consumption must change straight away. We need to focus on intelligence and the knowledge of consumers via information which is transparent and accessible. In doing so, we will produce more locally and produce more responsibly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Mr. Manders for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Reinders. Thank you very much for introducing this very ambitious agenda. Well, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, so we're expecting a lot of you. Without the consumer confidence, we get nowhere. We need to have more confidence of consumers, particularly when it comes to digital shopping. I think that the consumer needs to be better protected online than offline. Offline, you can see what you're buying. Online, you don't know whether the shop is in China or locally. 1 out of 4 consumers have been confronted with online fraud, and 30% have lost money because they were caught up in this fraud. We have to make sure that we have excellent protection. I'm not terribly sure how. Perhaps some kind of slowing things down in the bank so that the money doesn't leave the bank too early, because otherwise you end up not having any rights because the product has to come from China or somewhere. I also hope that you're going to come up with a proposal in the form of regulation which would be the same throughout the EU, so we don't have member states implementing the directive in different ways with all sorts of weird and wonderful rules, so neither the consumer nor the company know where they are. Regulations are good for the consumer and for the manufacturers. It's very important to have safe products. But what is also important is to promote a healthy lifestyle. We've seen that through COVID-19, and perhaps we can do that with this agenda as well. We've got to make sure that we have a level playing field, that producers from outside the EU who sell their products within the EU must comply with all the legislation in the EU. Finally, I'd like to make another comment. The big companies are not really looking at democracy. We haven't got the single charger because Apple doesn't want it, and that's 10 years.
Thank you very much. Next, Mr. Demel, 2 minutes. Please keep your speaking time.
Thank you, President. In recent years, online purchases have increased significantly, and European citizens are trusting the web more and more to buy their products. There are restrictions that have been necessary to contain COVID, and this has further pushed consumers toward this type of commerce and online purchases between 2009 and today have increased, or they've almost doubled from 32 to 60%. So this praiseworthy initiative is coming at the right time. We have to take account of the fact that the existing legislation is no longer sufficient to fully protect our consumers, nor are our companies fully satisfied with their access to the digital market. At the moment, the goods that we buy online are not subject to the same kind of checks as traditional distributors have to respect, and this has often led to a great deal of insatisfaction for a lot of the goods and services that are bought online. When you buy, for example, food goods, the risk is that you buy lower quality goods or those that are even counterfeit, with a significant risk to health. In parliamentary debate, we have to ensure that we think about initiatives that can help to modernise digital services and will protect both consumers and producers. Digital platforms, whose role has increased significantly in recent years, have to be more responsible for the goods that they offer, and we have to be able to pay proper attention to vulnerable users to ensure that they are protected from any potential fraud. We have to counter any trade practices which will violate consumer rights. We have to be able to ensure that they have proper information, and that we prevent any hidden or unfair practices. We have to ensure that we provide proper information. China, for example, has to be able to cooperate in allowing us to check its guarantees, and that we ensure that all products on the European market will not lead to any damage for the consumers, for the purchasers, or for the businesses who are producing their goods in Europe.
Thank you very much indeed. Next, Madam Tots for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. The digital single market has to become more attractive and more dynamic. Therefore, it is a prerequisite that citizens as well as enterprises have confidence in e-trade. For a long time, all indicators have been pointing to the fact that certain consumer protection rules need to be modernized and revised so that they could meet present challenges. I welcome the Commission's recognition for the necessity of change. As a result, the new consumer agenda that we discussed today was introduced. I can only welcome it. I believe that more efficient execution of rules, better legal redress tools, and deeper knowledge of consumer rights can strengthen consumers' confidence and promote the sentiment of security. However, rules can only be efficient as long as they enable consumers to seek remedy in case of infringement and as long as national authorities are able to enforce them. The new consumer agenda aspires to give an answer to important consumer protection issues of our times as, primarily due to the corona pandemic, markets develop and evolve fast. The pandemic further strengthens consumers' need for transparency, sustainability, and comfort. Those companies will enjoy the biggest benefits who obtain consumer confidence, are ready to invest for the sake of a smooth and undisturbed shopping experience, and who deem consumer health and safety a priority. I ask the Commission to pay attention to consumer safety and security, in particular to cyber security, and to follow the developments of consumer markets to be able to identify upcoming problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And now on behalf of the Commission, I'd like to ask